haunts you each and every day.
So it's been real hard for me.
And I was always told that I had a twin in Michigan the whole time. Our kids are even best friends and never even knew they were cousins.
Or is it another man who is now deceased, that he was the biological father of a child named Sonia? Plaintiff Ms. Lee is your sister.
I was the daddy's baby, and with me and my father was very close. If I do have siblings, brothers and sisters out there, I would want to connect with them and bond with them.
Yes, I even know her grandmother. And her grandmother and my grandmother are best friends.
Known or had this knowledge that she was out there somewhere?
Probably since I was about 5 or 6.
Really?
And they would say, it was a girl here that looks just like you. I think she your sister. This was the talk.
Really?
I missed it as...
Inside Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than most family law disputes, because this case wasn't simply about paternity. It was about identity, memory, loss, and the kind of emotional collateral damage that usually only surfaces in celebrate recovery testimonies. The moment the plaintiff, Sonia Lee, stepped forward, it was easy to sense the emotional weight she carried. She wasn't just seeking answers. She was walking into a room where her entire life story could be rewritten by forensic truth. A DNA test, the same kind many people regret taking when the results expose buried family secrets, now sat at the center of her journey for clarity. Sonia explained that for nearly 4 decades, she believed one man, the father who raised her and gave her his last name, was unquestionably her biological parent. Her identity was grounded in that belief. But then came the unexpected, a message, a claim, and a story linked to a man she had never met. This new man was deceased, leaving behind only relatives and a powerful deathbed confession that he believed he had another daughter named Sonia. That assertion was now the engine driving this courtroom toward a truth that promised to dismantle assumptions. Judge Lauren Lake, known for bridging the relationship between law and justice with grace and precision, the same philosophical tension explored in the game-changing attorney podcast and discussions of the concept of justice in jurisprudence, approached the case not as gossip, but as a profound question about what evidence can do when family narratives collide. The situation resembled the evidence stage in a divorce case, where one missing detail can lead to an adverse inference under the Evidence Act, shifting the entire balance of the dispute. Here, however, the missing person was not a witness. It was the father himself. As the court listened, Sonia described how she first dismissed the outreach she received online. From her perspective, strangers were insisting she might be another man's child, and she resisted even acknowledging the possibility. She had loved the man she grew up with. She was a daddy's baby, as she said, and questioning his role felt like a betrayal of her own history. Many DNA test cheating stories begin this way, with denial, disbelief, emotional resistance, until the truth forces its way forward. The defendants, Ms. France and Ms. Davis, entered the courtroom not as antagonists, but as women who sincerely believed Sonia was their sister. Their testimony revealed a lifelong awareness of Sonia's existence, despite never meeting her. They had grown up hearing stories of a missing sibling, almost like an unresolved chapter in the family's narrative. They explained that their father had carried regret for years, and his one request before dying was that they find the daughter he believed was out there. One of the most striking revelations was how close their lives had unknowingly been. Their children, the next generation, had become best friends, casually calling each other cousins even though no one had yet validated the blood connection. The situation echoed emotional arcs in adoption stories' full episodes, where parallel lives unfold without awareness of shared roots. Judge Lauren Lake noted how proximity without knowledge often deepens the shock once the truth emerges. When Ms. Davis described the search process, The courtroom heard how misunderstanding and miscommunication had even led to Sonia being mistakenly listed as deceased in the father's obituary. A literal line in printed memorial text declared her dead. For Sonia, this revelation intensified her confusion. She said it felt bizarre to see her own supposed death recorded in the narrative of another family she didn't know. The emotional conflict resonated with themes explored in the Divorce Course podcast, where identity, family, and unresolved histories form the emotional landscape for legal conflict. As Judge Lake reviewed documents, including the adoption paperwork that had changed Sonia's last name from Parker to Lee, it became clear that the case intertwined family law history, biological uncertainty, and the lingering impact of choices made decades earlier. Adoption itself carries legal and emotional complexities, and the court carefully acknowledged this without allowing it to overshadow the present question. Then came another emotional layer, the presence of Ms. Washington, Sonia's mother. Her testimony created a bridge between past and present that the courtroom desperately needed. She confirmed that she had indeed been involved with the man in question, Mr. Miller, before he left her during pregnancy. She explained that the man who raised Sonia, Mr. Lee, stepped in, took responsibility, and gave Sonia his name. She admitted that she had never told Sonia the truth because she didn't think it was necessary. Her silence, intended as protection, had become a barrier to truth. Sonia expressed something that resonated throughout the room, the pain of being the only one who didn't know the truth. She emphasized that had she known earlier, she could have had the chance to bond with siblings, engage in family traditions, or even argue and disagree like ordinary brothers and sisters do. The court often hears the legal side of such matters, but here it heard the human side, the sense of lost time, missed milestones, and relationships that were never given a chance to exist. When the court welcomed Mr. Miller, the alleged sibling and emotional current passed through the room. It was his first time seeing Sonia, yet he openly expressed the belief that she was his sister. He stated it plainly, without hesitation, saying she looked just like the other siblings. For Sonia, who had resisted forming expectations, this moment added both hope and fear. The truth coming toward her, the truth that changes everything, was now unavoidable. Judge Lauren Lake reminded everyone that DNA evidence is scientific, neutral, and definitive. It has become the modern instrument of truth, much like how the Supreme Court child support cases rely on the facts rather than emotional narratives. In today's world, DNA testing has replaced speculation, rumor, and memory. It resolves questions that linger between households, across states, and sometimes across generations. The envelope containing the results became the focal point of the courtroom. It symbolized certainty waiting to emerge, the type of certainty that both resolves and disrupts. Families often fear DNA answers because the truth can invalidate decades of assumptions. But in this courtroom, Sonia needed the truth more than she feared it. Judge Lake prepared to reveal the scientific findings, and the entire courtroom felt suspended in anticipation. The defendants held hands. Sonia breathed deeply. Even the audience seemed to understand the gravity of what was coming. The results, prepared by DNA diagnostics, would establish whether Sonia was indeed the biological daughter of the now-deceased man and the biological sibling of the defendants present in court. Judge Lake opened the envelope. She read the results, and the DNA confirmed the connection. The defendants were indeed Sonia's biological family. The emotional release that followed, tears, relief, disbelief, embraces, filled the courtroom with a sense of closure that many cases never reach. Sonia expressed that the truth lifted a lifelong weight off her shoulders. For the first time, she had both the emotional permission and the factual foundation to step into a new family chapter without fear. The emotional breakthrough in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom did not mark the end of the day's legal and personal complexities. Instead, it opened the door to a second storm, another paternity dispute layered with doubt, conflicting timelines, broken communication, and the kind of relational chaos often discussed in DNA test cheating stories and family-focused episodes of the Divorce Course podcast. Once the courtroom settled into its next case, the mood subtly shifted from slow-building heartbreak to a volatile dispute fueled by uncertainty and suppressed frustration. Here, the plaintiff, Ms. Porter-Ratkins, arrived carrying a different kind of pain, not the pain of lost identity, but the pain of raising a newborn with no support from the man she believed to be the father. Just 3 months postpartum, she spoke with the intensity of a mother who had navigated sleepless nights, physical recovery, and emotional turbulence without the partnership she expected. The case represented the harsh reality many face when relationships break under pressure, the type that often ends up referenced in podcast conversations about modern parenting struggles, celebrate recovery testimonies, and even Supreme Court child support rulings that emphasize parental duty over relational conflict. From the start, it was clear this wasn't merely about biology. It was about responsibility, credibility, and the long-term emotional health of a child who had no say in how the relationships around him unfolded. As Judge Lauren Lake always emphasizes, the courtroom's purpose is not to punish past behavior, but to establish truth so that a child's future is not built on instability. The judge's poise often reflects the broader relationship between law and justice, where fairness must stand firm even when emotions threaten to spill over. Mr. Fisher, the defendant, approached the bench with reluctance, but also with a kind of defensive certainty. He maintained that he was not the biological father, claiming that Ms. Porter-Ratkins had sexual relationships with other men during the time of conception. His confidence came not from solid evidence but from assumptions, recollections, and comparisons, a fragile foundation in legal terms. In many jurisdictions, unsupported assumptions lead to adverse inference in Evidence Act interpretations, where doubt created without proof can backfire when weighed against scientific clarity. Judge Lake, balancing calm professionalism with sharp inquiry, encouraged each side to explain the timeline. She needed clarity, not emotional chaos. Descriptions were provided of how the plaintiff and defendant met, how their intimacy developed, and how rapidly everything escalated. Like many modern relationships, their connection blended attraction, convenience, and impulsive decisions, elements often highlighted in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal experts discuss how small moments of carelessness can spiral into long-term legal disputes. As the court listened, it became increasingly clear that both parties remembered events differently. The plaintiff spoke with certainty about the dates, her cycle, and the circumstances under which they slept together. She insisted that she communicated her fertility window clearly and that the defendant chose to ignore the risk. It was a story that resonated with countless real-world cases, where clear warnings mix with momentary choices, ultimately leading to children who deserve support, stability, and acknowledgement. Meanwhile, the defendant focused instead on statements the plaintiff had allegedly made about previous partners, bringing forward claims of a past miscarriage involving another man and suggesting ongoing sexual histories. His portrayal of these events, though emotionally charged, lacked consistency and documentation. Judge Lake's ability to filter emotion from fact, a skill often analyzed in discussions on the concept of justice in jurisprudence, became essential. In family court, Truth is not determined by who speaks louder, but by the reliability of evidence, biological or otherwise. This case grew more complex when a second potential father, Mr. Tate, was acknowledged. His presence added a layer of human vulnerability. Unlike Mr. Fisher's skepticism, Mr. Tate believed wholeheartedly that he might be the child's biological father. The connection between him and the plaintiff stretched back years, creating a history that could not simply be dismissed. He brought his mother to the courtroom, signaling that he wasn't only emotionally invested, his entire family sought clarity. His mother's testimony became an unexpectedly stabilizing voice. With a medical background, she analyzed the conception timeline carefully, explaining how ovulation and pregnancy windows operate, a level of rationality often referenced in legal and medical cross-discipline podcast conversations. Her reasoning was grounded, methodical, and calm, contrasting the tension between the primary parties. The court took note of her timeline, but even her analysis underscored a fundamental truth. Speculation cannot substitute for DNA results. Judge Lake highlighted this point with her signature clarity. In a world where anyone can construct their own narrative, DNA remains the ultimate neutral arbiter. Families might build stories around emotion, memory, fear, or even guilt, but science stands independent of all of that. This is why so many people say truth changes everything when DNA is introduced into disputes, because biology does not bend to feelings. Throughout the testimony, the courtroom witnessed how easily relationships turn into battlegrounds when communication breaks down. The plaintiff expressed not just emotional hurt but practical frustration. The lack of support during pregnancy, the absence during delivery, the refusal to help with essentials like diapers, formula, or medical appointments. Her tears weren't just emotional. They were tied to the daily realities of raising a child alone while navigating a legal system designed to ensure children receive the care they are entitled to. Her accusations illuminated a recurring pattern seen in child support cases across jurisdictions. One parent shoulders the full burden, while the other avoids responsibility due to doubts, conflict, or denial. Many episodes of family law television and adoption stories, full episodes portray similar struggles, where uncertainty delays support that children critically need. When the defendant responded, his statements often reflected more insecurity than factual dispute. He admitted to sleeping with the plaintiff unprotected. He admitted to knowing the risks. Yet he also expressed a passive desire for the child to belong to the other man, a sentiment Judge Lake immediately recognized as emotional avoidance rather than legal reasoning. Courts cannot rule based on who seems more prepared or more mature. They rule based on the truth. This case also highlighted a modern cultural reality. Relationships formed quickly, ending even faster, often without clear boundaries or communication. It was the kind of relational whirlwind that later becomes the subject of cautionary tales in People Regret Taking DNA test discussions, because those tests often expose more than intended. As testimonies continued, it became clear the plaintiff was not trying to manipulate the system. She simply wanted recognition for her child. Mr. Tate, on the other hand, wanted clarity for emotional and personal reasons. The defendant wanted to avoid responsibility unless forced by evidence. Judge Lauren Lake recognized all of this. She addressed the courtroom with the same firm compassion she uses when explaining decisions rooted in the relationship between law and justice. Justice for the child required certainty, not speculation. Justice for the mother required truth, not accusations. Justice for the potential fathers required clarity so they could move forward with assurance instead of lingering doubt. When the DNA envelope appeared again, the symbol of scientific truth that has become central to modern family law, A chill seemed to pass through the courtroom. This envelope had the power to define a family structure, to confirm or eliminate doubt, and to determine who would step into legal and financial responsibility under the spirit of Supreme Court child support principles. Everyone stilled, everyone braced. And once again, Judge Lake opened the results. The DNA determined that Mr. Fisher, not Mr. Tate, was the biological father. The courtroom reacted with a mixture of shock, relief, and emotional volatility. The plaintiff's tears flowed, partly from validation, partly from the weight of responsibility finally shifting onto the man who had denied his connection to his own child. Mr. Fisher demonstrated a momentary shift, expressing a strange combination of surprise and acceptance, a recognition that the truth had reached him whether he was ready or not. The DNA outcome did more than clarify biology. It forced a turning point. Many cases simply end here, but Judge Lake ensured that the emotional, legal, and moral implications were addressed. She acknowledged the plaintiff's pain, the defendant's previous doubt, and the child's need for stability. She stressed the responsibility that now fell squarely on the father's shoulders, grounded not in emotion but in biological fact. She framed the ruling as a chance, not a punishment, for Mr. Fisher to step into his role with intention and accountability. In doing so, Judge Lake connected legal expectation with a deeper moral principle, the same balance explored in jurisprudence. Justice is not only about consequences but about restoration. As the courtroom absorbed the results of the second paternity case, the emotional landscape shifted yet again. Truth had been delivered, and like in so many discussions in the game-changing attorney podcast, the outcome forced everyone involved to confront the reality that accountability begins the moment uncertainty ends. The result left Mr. Fisher with no space for denial, interpretation, or emotional retreat. Biology had spoken. And as Judge Lauren Lake has reminded countless litigants, a DNA test doesn't bend for comfort. It only delivers truth. The courtroom atmosphere after the ruling reflected the common trajectory seen in DNA test cheating stories, where emotional entanglements and competing narratives eventually collapse under scientific certainty. For Ms. Porter-Atkins, the result didn't erase the months of carrying the burden alone, but it provided something she had not felt since the day she discovered she was pregnant: validation. For the first time, the weight wasn't hers alone. It now belonged equally to the person the law recognized as the biological father. Judge Lauren Lake, balancing empathy with the firmness expected from someone trained in the concept of justice in jurisprudence, took the time to address what had unfolded. She reminded the courtroom that emotional mistakes, misunderstandings, and poor communication are common themes in modern relationships. But once a child is born, every personal failure becomes secondary to the responsibility owed to that child. Her words merged the clarity of law with the moral grounding often emphasized in Supreme Court child support decisions. That support is not optional, not sentimental, and not dependent on romantic history. The structure of this second case revealed how a court often functions at the evidence stage in divorce cases. Timelines are scrutinized, recollections tested, and credibility weighed with precision. Every claim is filtered through standards that prevent emotionally motivated distortion. When Mr. Fisher attempted to rely on vague assumptions and accusations rather than tangible evidence, Judge Lake treated those statements exactly as modern judges are trained to treat unsupported claims, with caution and skepticism. It reflected the core of the adverse inference in evidence act, which teaches that failing to present clear and reliable evidence often implies that the evidence does not support the party's position. Likewise, the plaintiff's testimony drew from her lived experience, but was strengthened by details, dates, medical information, timeline breakdowns, providing the clarity the court needed. Her seriousness about protecting her child's future created an undeniable contrast with the defendant's earlier minimization of his role. As Judge Lake interpreted the facts, her tone carried the same level of responsibility as if she were interpreting adoption stories' full episodes, analyzing not just legal outcomes but emotional consequences. The presence of Mr. Tate and his mother added a secondary layer of complexity, reminding the courtroom that paternity disputes rarely involve just two people. They often involve extended families, generational expectations, hopes, and fears. Mr. Tate's sincerity highlighted a deeper truth about modern relational dynamics. People seek connection, certainty, and purpose through family ties, even when the path becomes tangled. His mother, approaching the matter like a clinician, provided a grounded explanation of ovulation windows that mirrored the kind of real-world clarity discussed in health-centered episodes of the Divorce Course podcast. Once the results confirmed that Mr. Fisher, not Mr. Tate, was the biological father, the emotional shift in the courtroom was unmistakable. Where uncertainty had clouded discussions before, the certainty now revealed left the parties standing in an entirely new social reality. This process, painful, direct, but ultimately clarifying, demonstrated the guiding principle that truth changes everything. Identity, responsibility, and relationships cannot remain the same once truth steps into the room. This theme is one of the reasons people both embrace and fear DNA testing. Many people regret taking DNA tests not because the results are inaccurate, but because the truth forces them into confrontations they never prepared for. In courtrooms like Judge Lake, however, fear cannot be allowed to override justice. Truth must serve the child first, and the adults must adjust themselves accordingly. With the paternity established, Judge Lauren Lake shifted the courtroom's attention toward forward motion, the same type of practical direction discussed in legal-focused podcast conversations about co-parenting, custody, and post-judgment transitions. Her tone conveyed that while the emotional storm had reached its peak, the legal obligations were only beginning. She addressed Mr. Fisher directly and thoroughly, emphasizing a principle reflected in every Supreme Court child support precedent. Once certified as the biological father, he must fulfill the obligations attached to that role. Child support becomes not an optional gesture, but a legal requirement measured by income, stability, and consistency. Judge Lake also highlighted the importance of presence, not just payment. Money may keep a child fed, clothed, and medically supported, but emotional involvement shapes identity, security, and development. As she spoke, the courtroom recognized how the relationship between law and justice becomes most visible in family court. Law provides structure, timelines, procedures, enforcement mechanisms. Justice, however, emerges in how those rules are applied to human lives. Judge Lake's voice reflected that balance, stressing that Mr. Fisher, having denied involvement for months, now had an opportunity to step into genuine paternal responsibility. Her ruling didn't erase the conflict, the history, or the emotional cracks, but it laid a foundation. Justice in family court rarely means restoring what once was. Instead, it means creating a stable framework for what must come next. In this case, justice meant a child would no longer exist in legal limbo. It meant a mother could finally ask, without fear, for shared responsibility. And it meant a father, once doubtful, now had clarity that could shape how he rebuilds his role in his child's life. For Mr. Tate and his mother, the ruling delivered closure. Their investment in the case had been rooted in emotional history, but they accepted the scientific truth with grace. a contrast to what often happens in DNA test cheating stories, where secondary parties struggle to step back after becoming emotionally invested. Judge Lake acknowledged their grace, reinforcing that sometimes justice is not about winning, but about understanding where to release a claim and where to support from a distance. For Ms. Porter-Atkins, the courtroom provided more than a legal victory. It provided emotional reinforcement, the kind found in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals finally see their struggles acknowledged in a public, authoritative space. Her months of frustration, exhaustion, and uncertainty were now formally recognized, not as private suffering, but as a legitimate grievance addressed by the law. The courtroom itself served as a reminder of how many modern relationships follow patterns shaped by transient connections, digital introductions, and rapid emotional investment, a cycle often dissected in relationship-oriented podcast episodes across platforms. As Judge Lake examined these cases, she did not simply apply law. She applied social understanding, grounding each ruling in compassion without compromising standards. In concluding the day's proceedings, Judge Lauren Lake emphasized a theme central to the concept of justice in jurisprudence: that truth is not merely discovered, it must be acted upon. She urged both fathers from the cases heard that day to move forward with intention, responsibility, and commitment. While one case centered on siblings rediscovering each other after decades, and the other centered on a newborn needing stability, both demonstrated how deeply DNA results shape identity, responsibility, and personal history. The first case had revealed the emotional aftermath of discovering hidden family ties, the pain of lost years, and the complicated joy of unexpected connection. The second case exposed the turbulence of doubt, the fragility of modern relationships, and the urgent need for accountability. Together, they painted a portrait of how truth, especially biological truth, can reshape every aspect of a family's structure. By the time Judge Lake closed the session, the courtroom had seen the full spectrum of what paternity cases often carry: confusion, denial, hope, sorrow, defensiveness, relief, and ultimately resolution. The law had spoken through documentation and DNA. Justice had spoken through clarity and accountability. The people who walked into the courtroom that day were not the same people who walked out. Through the rigor of the courtroom, the precision of the testing, and the steady hand of a judge who embodies the connection between law and justice, each party emerged with a new understanding of themselves and each other. And as they left, the core message echoed, a message reflected in countless family law stories, courtroom documentaries, adoption stories, full episodes, and even the cautionary discussions shared in legal podcasts. When the truth arrives, everything changes.